Now this time, many of you were in my last one, so welcome back. But this time we have a total of 4 handouts. You should have the little booklet. And I told the last group that we're trying to change your whole paradigm on stewardship, so that's why it's upside down. Worked last time and this time, that's cool. Anyway, you should have a booklet. You also have the PowerPoint, and there's a number of examples that we're going to go through this time of a successful campaign. An article, as I said in the last series, I talked about how incredibly rich our GBOD website is. And so this is one example of the kinds of things, even about capital campaigns, that you can get on the GBOD stewardship portion of the website. And then here is something, our United Methodist Foundation here in Florida might have something similar, but it's something that I've had for some time from the Louisiana Foundation about should you hire a consultant. And of course they don't have a dog in the fight, so it's helpful, I think, to see what the foundations recommend, and indeed the foundations do recommend that you hire a consultant. So if you will, let's go ahead and move inside our booklet. And I'd like to begin, if you open it the way you normally do on the top, left-hand side, but if you flip it around, it'll be the bottom right-hand side to the pyramid that we have. And what this is a more of a holistic look at the dimensions of church stewardship. And the slide is up here as well. And so as we look at this, you can see that it is a more comprehensive approach than often we use. Now, most of us do spend most of our time, as we should, on that bottom part, the base of the pyramid, which is our basic expression of faithfulness, encouraging growth in tithing and regular giving, special giving opportunities, budgeting, communicating to the congregation where the money goes, and our sound financial policies, hopefully, that you have in place, and stewardship education. That is our base funding. And what is so very important, if you hear one thing today, hear this. Capital campaigns should always be above and beyond giving. We're not talking about switching dollars. It needs to be always above and beyond giving. So this is our base of support, hopefully the tithe and the things that we do in our holistic stewardship ministry. But we do also need to give attention to the rest of the pyramid. If you look at the top of the pyramid, estate or planned giving, bequests, planned gifts, those kinds of things, most churches do absolutely nothing to encourage this kind of giving. And yet it is the ultimate expression of our faithfulness. Planned giving and bequests can make a huge difference, especially as trillions of dollars are transferred from the World War II generation, or as the greatest generations are often called, to the next generation. I gave last time an example. Boston Avenue United Methodist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, has almost $60 million in endowment. And the reason for that is because Musan Biggs, the senior pastor there, has done an amazing job over the last 35 years to remind people to include their church in their will. So it can make an incredible difference. I just want to encourage you, and again, some of this will be a little redundant for my friends that were here last time, but I do want to remind you to please use your Florida Foundation. They are incredible experts who are very passionate about what they do, and they can help you with the top of this pyramid. So please use your Florida Foundation to develop a bequest program, to develop a planned giving program. But today we want to spend our time on the middle portion of that pyramid, because capital campaigns, major giving, are often the tool that people use to encourage the kind of major gift giving that we're talking about. Capital campaigns should cause people to rearrange their priorities and give sacrificially, again, above and beyond. You cannot emphasize that enough. People's regular giving. Capital campaigns are not designed to provide a quick fix for a struggling congregation. That's not what the purpose of a capital campaign is. Capital campaigns are an opportunity for a church to strengthen and empower life-changing ministries. Most often, capital campaigns are used to fund land acquisition, new construction, renovation, endowment funding, debt retirement, and other large capital expenses. And large will vary from congregation to congregation. If you were in the last presentation, you heard me talk about my little church. A van was a big deal for us. We had a capital campaign. For other churches, a van is just something that you might put in your annual budget because you have those kinds of resources. So what is large will vary from congregation to congregation, and it is a relative thing. Capital campaigns spiritually compel a congregation to give its assets for future ministry. And they make a big difference financially in the life and ministry of a church if you do it correctly. As a capital campaigns consistently generate more revenue than any other source of funding. Consistently, a capital campaign will generate more revenue than probably your church has ever seen. It is not uncommon for a church to raise in a 3-year period. Now keep in mind, capital campaigns are rarely a 1-year deal. They're usually 3 years. In a 3-year period, it's typical for a capital campaign to raise anywhere from 1 to 3 times your regular annual income above and beyond what you're already receiving, while embracing and encouraging people to give more to the annual and to the stewardship campaigns. Now, if you look on your handout, you'll see several other benefits in the what column to capital campaigns, including, and I'll just highlight a couple of these, unifying the church in mission and vision. It is a great opportunity to look at why are we here, where are we going, and for people to embrace that mission and that vision. It also will create increased involvement. One of the best things that happens as I work with larger churches, many of which have become staff-driven, is we get the laity involved again. And that can be invaluable in terms of everything you do in the church if you get more people involved in the life and ministry of your church. And also spiritual growth, not only as individuals, but as a church. It is amazing when people are finished with a campaign, how they will talk about it. And they will talk about it, a capital campaign, as if it had been a revival, a spiritual awakening type of experience. I worked with a church in Auburn, Alabama, and the way they would do their annual campaigns, it was a more contemporary church, is they would interview people. And they would ask them, what was the highlight of your life at Cornerstone United Methodist Church? And so the people would answer, whatever was on their heart about the highlight of that year. So the pastor called me after he looked at the video and he goes, Pat, you won't believe this, but I just looked at the video. Person after person who was interviewed said the capital campaign was the highlight of the life and ministry of that church in that year. So it can be a wonderful time in the life and ministry of your church. A capital campaign should be about the process of growing in relationship to God and to each other, as much as it is about reaching those financial goals. As I am interviewed and often asked, why should we go with you versus other companies? One of the things I always say is, if all you care about is the financial goal, I am probably not the person you want to go with. But if your goal is to have a spiritually uplifting and growing time in the life of the congregation, and, oh, by the way, raise a lot of money, then we may be a good fit. So, if you focus on the financial goal, I think you're going to find, and only the financial goal, I think you're going to find that it's just going to be a fundraising campaign. But if you focus on the transformation that can occur through giving, and as you unify together in mission and vision, and as you get more people involved, I think what you're going to see is that it's going to transform the life of the church, and, oh, by the way, raise a lot of money. It should be as much about faith raising as fundraising. Your capital campaign, think about that, should be as much about faith raising as fundraising because our giving is a natural outflow of the grace of God in our lives. A capital campaign should be about daring to see the vision that God has given us and having the courage to make the personal sacrifices to help it come true. Horace Greeley, who was a great newspaper editor during Civil War, received a letter from a woman that read, "Our church is in dire financial straits. We have tried everything to keep it going. A strawberry festival, an oyster supper, a donkey party," whatever that was, a turkey dinner, and finally a Bach social. Nothing has worked. Will you please tell us, Dr. Greeley, what we should do? Well, Horace Greeley answered her in two very simple and yet profound words. Try Christianity. Horace Greeley understood the truth that I have seen over and over and over again. Money follows faith. Among people and churches where faith is strong, money is not the overriding issue. Capital campaigns are not about gimmicks. Capital campaigns are about intentional in everything we do, being intentional in everything we do to bring others to a closer relationship with the living Lord. Let me give you some tips for a successful campaign. All right, 10 tips. And you do have this in your flyer of the PowerPoint, okay? Number 1, set realistic goals. I have walked away several times from campaigns for churches where the goal was unrealistic. Don't make the goal the anticipated cost of the project. That's not a goal. That's what you need to build whatever you're building or do whatever you want to do. The projected cost of the project presents the money goal, but not the need. Formulas and research will give you a much better idea about what the financial goal should be. The cost of the project has little to do with the giving potential or the willingness for a congregation to give. Nationwide, in a 3-year capital campaign, most churches can expect to raise 1 to 3 times their annual giving. Again, over 3 years, 1 to 3 times. So if you want to know what sort of your range is, then multiply your annual giving by 1 time and 3 times, and that'll give you a range of what you might expect to raise. Now, sometimes it'll be better than that, sometimes it's not in that range. 1 to 3 times your annual giving. And again, it's over a 3-year period. The difference between the low and high ends of that range is determined by major gifts and the base of support, the number of people who support it. Now, other significant factors include the following. Demographic factors. Are you a more professional congregation, one that has higher incomes? Well, those people are going to be more able to give. Or are you not? Are you more of a blue-collar congregation or a working congregation? Well, then you just don't have as much potential as congregations who have a higher base. Does the church have a history of pledging? I've also turned down campaigns where they've never done a stewardship campaign and they never want to do a stewardship campaign. That's not the environment for a successful capital campaign. Also, do they have a history of being generous and reaching goals? That will make a difference as to where on that range you are. Direction. Is the church moving forward? Again, this is not a fix for a problem. This is about moving forward. Are you a healthy and growing congregation? This will have an impact. Internal problems. One of the campaigns I helped lead, the day of the kickoff, they decided to fire the worship leader without warning. That campaign did not do well. And you can see why. So if you're having internal problems, don't launch a capital campaign. But I will say that capital campaigns, even healthy ones, tend to bubble up whatever's there. And so that's why it's so important to have it in a container of grace and spiritual formation, or else it can become divisive. Next is support for the project. Does the vast majority of the congregation support it? Are there generational differences in support? That can also be quite divisive. Financial problems. Is the church having trouble with debt and paying bills? Then again, you need to look at, we're already having trouble paying our bills. Maybe we don't need to build that Family Life Center right now. Support of the pastor. Bottom line, if the pastor does not support this, do not move forward. It is impossible to have a successful campaign without the support. And I'm not just talking about, as Bishop Carter was talking about earlier, his words, but his action. One of the things that I do is I am trying to discern whether God is calling me to work with a congregation is just ask the pastor, are you planning on personally supporting it? One of the things that I do is I always personally support every campaign I help lead. Because I do not believe I can effectively lead if I don't get to it. How can I ask others to lead? Even though I'm never going to go to that church probably after this campaign except for follow-up. But the important thing is it's for the kingdom's work. And so it shouldn't matter whether it's my church or not. But how can I ask others to lead if I'm not willing to give myself? If I'm not willing to give myself. And then finally, the type of project will determine where in that range. New construction is usually the highest return on investment. Debt is often the lowest. But debt can be a very empowering and inspiring thing as we talk about the next stage. Second, plan. And we'll talk about this a lot later. But planning is absolutely essential. Ask yourself 3 questions. 3 questions as you begin to assess the feasibility of this. Do we need it? Do we need it? There's a book called Deciding When Not to Build. It's written by an architect. And he saw church after church after church building things that they didn't need. And so it makes you think out of the box on how you can do some multi-use of existing space and things like that. Deciding When Not to Build is a great resource. Do we need it? Can we afford it? Can we afford it? And is the timing right? Sometimes you don't have any choice, frankly. In the last few years, I've done an awful lot of debt retirement. It's gone very well. But, they didn't have the choice. They had a mortgage. They needed to move forward. Obviously, in, say, this year versus 2 years ago, it would have been more fruitful because people's incomes, thankfully, are improving. But if you have the choice, the timing is essential. Failure to acknowledge and address these questions up front is a strategic mistake, and it will have a difference, make a difference in the back. To do so and to look at these questions and to do this planning, it validates to the entire congregation as a whole that we have thought through things and we have done our due diligence. And so people will respond if they think that you have done the appropriate research and investigation as you go forward. The congregation does need to accept the ownership of the project, and building consensus and ownership in the congregation is critically important on the front end and all the way through the campaign. Third, tie the project to the church's mission. Building a building is not the mission of the church. In fact, it may be counter to the mission of the church. How does this new project reach the lost or nurture the faithful? One of the most effective campaigns I ever had began with asking, what is it we need to do in mission? And then they figured out what the container was going to be for it. Instead of a lot of times I see buildings being built, and they don't really know what they need. They just know, it seems like we're kind of full. We're having a hard time getting parking. Well, okay, that's understandable, but what is the bigger picture of what we're trying to do? So come up with your mission needs first and your building is second. A good model for a capital campaign is found in 1 Chronicles 29, 1 through 9, and we won't go through that. But in the scripture, David clearly communicated in the campaign the offering for the temple, how the purposes of God were going to be fulfilled. And so that's a great scriptural reference. Number 4, conduct the campaign when people are there. If people are there, they cannot respond. And so typically the most often times for capital campaigns is during Lent, which is a great time to be doing a sacrificial campaign when, of course, you're in the season of Lent. and also in the fall. Because typically that's when people are coming back, especially in that back-to-school time, is typically a high attendance time. 5, always separate the capital campaign and the annual campaign. Again, I've walked away from this many times when people don't listen. Do not combine the campaigns. The average United Methodist, depending on what research you look at, gives somewhere between 2.3 and 2.6% of their income. There is much growth that needs to occur in our baseline, going back to our chart, baseline giving. How in the world do we expect to improve that and at the same time encourage people to give sacrificially? One over two of them is going to be cut short. And it also encourages people to just simply split. Well, I normally give $1,000 a month, so I'll give $500 to the capital and $500 to the annual. Well, all you've done is erode your support for your mission and ministry, and you're not getting a dime more than you would have gotten. And now you've got to go spend it on buildings, which means that you're just digging yourself a hole. So do not combine those two. What appears to be the easiest approach is not always the best in achieving the long-term goals for widening the base of stewardship and increasing giving, period. When correctly planned and scheduled, the two campaigns can maximize the congregation's involvement and spiritual growth. Number 6, embrace, trust, and believe that it is feasible for your church to give more than it's already given. That is always one of the first things that I hear. Our church has already given all they can do. There's just no way we can get more. And then we do. In fact, in Generous People by Eugene Grimm, and this is based on statistical research, he states that in most churches, with very few exceptions, 1 in 40 families, 1 in 40, have the ability to make a one-time gift equal or greater than whatever your church budget is. 1 in 40. So that tells you the giving potential that people have. And again, United Methodists give anywhere from 2.3 to 2.6%. So you can see the opportunities we have just in terms of the biblical standard of the time. Number 7, focus your capital campaign on accumulated assets. Now, the majority of gifts are still going to come from above and beyond giving, weekly, monthly, yearly. But you need to focus and encourage people to give of their accumulated assets, stocks, bonds, real estate, jewelry, those kinds of things that people have, and when inspired, will give of those. Number 8, hire a consultant. Now, I know you're going, well, you're a consultant, of course you'd say that. But research has shown that a consultant increases success because of the thorough organization, the planning, and the follow-up that a good consultant should provide. The consultant is paid to ensure that all the right steps are taken. If you do it yourself, you're going to end up, because you don't have time for this, you're going to end up short-circuiting and trying to cut corners, and it will impact your campaign. A well-done campaign takes anywhere from 50 to 90 days, and I'm talking about dedicated days. I'm not talking about an hour here, an hour there. And I'm just guessing that most of you probably don't have that kind of time to spend on it. So you can see that when you don't have enough time, what do? You cut corners. So again, a consultant can make a difference. Plus, they've been around the block. They know what works and what doesn't, and you can avoid those pitfalls. Typically, including everything, we're talking about printed materials, consultant fees, food, etc. The total cost is usually somewhere in the neighborhood of about 5% of what's raised. And do not hire a consultant who bases what they charge you on a percent of what's raised. The nonprofit codes say that that is absolutely unethical for you to do, because think about it. If I'm working real hard to increase your giving, well, of course she is. She's going to get a percent of whatever we raise. It just becomes a self-interest that you don't want to have. So a fixed fee is how you should pay. Statistically, not using an experienced professional consultant will cost you much more than whatever you pay your consultant. Number 9, be careful with naming opportunities. And you see that little cartoon in there in the guide that you received, and it is so true. I have been in churches where it was that bad. One of the churches I worked with, in the centerpiece cross, like this one, except it was much smaller than that, at the bottom of the cross, they had "cross given by" on the cross. And I was like, that is just so wrong. It can happen, and it can get out of control in a New York second. Personally, I have never led a campaign that includes naming opportunities for a church. I think it's in direct opposition to Jesus' teaching on the widow's mite. Naming does not support the concept of proportional giving, which is the biblical standard. And I think that it obviously applies to our annual giving, but should apply to all of our giving to God. Most churches do have a history of naming opportunities and have a memorial tag on many, many things. If you're going to have it, the trustees should develop a consistent approach to naming. One rule of thumb in naming opportunities is it should be reserved for those who pay anywhere from 51% to 100%. One of the rules of thumb that I have applied in institutional fundraising is anything less than $1 million, 100%. Anything above $1 million needs to be at least 51% if they're going to get their name on it, okay? Before soliciting the gift, the method of recognition should be identified on the front end, not on the back end, so that it fits the aesthetics and the appropriateness of the church, and people don't think that they were promised this or that. Also clarify with the donor that the gift must be complete before the naming occurs. Get the facts correct before the gift is finalized regarding the amount of gift, how it will be paid, nature of recognition, spelling of names, all these kinds of things on the front end. And do not have too many naming opportunities, as naming opportunities should only be for significant levels, so the larger gifts are not diminished. And number 10, follow-up. And again, we're going to talk about this a little bit more. Again, one of the big things a consultant should provide to you is a comprehensive follow-up campaign. Because all the pledging in the world doesn't do any good if people aren't giving to it. Okay, so let me just give you 5 keys that I found for a successful campaign, and those are plan, educate, inspire, involve, and follow up. And again, you've got this in your folder. All right, the first one is plan. One of my favorite quotes, especially if you were here last time, you know that it is. And that is, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And this is so true in a capital campaign. And so as you plan, what you want to do is you want to pray and discern God's leading. The Lord doesn't build a house, the work of the builders is useless. So it's important to plan and discern where God is leading us. Determine campaign objectives and themes. Select, recruit, and train leadership. Create and develop the plan, and prepare and produce the campaign materials before you get going. You don't want people stressed out as you're doing the campaign. Where's that brochure that we need to put in the newsletter tomorrow? So have it done beforehand. One of the things is having a logo that is clearly your church. Don't just get a generic logo. This is Duke Memorial United Methodist Church in Raleigh, North Carolina, and the Twin Spires is their landmark. And so we incorporated that in their logo. There's another example, and that is, this is St. Francis, also in Raleigh. I do a lot of work in Raleigh. And that's what their interior window looks like. So when they saw that, that wasn't a generic logo to them. That was their logo that they knew had been created especially for them. One of the other things you need to do is to plan well, to develop calendars and timelines and who's doing what. So this is just one of those pages, all right? Second thing is to educate. What you want people to do is to understand the need. And as church leaders, we often think, oh, well, everybody knows we need a church bus. No, they don't. They know it if they happen to have used the bus, or if they wanted to use the bus and it was broken down, or whatever. So don't assume that people understand the need. So we want to educate people. And one of the ways we do that is through brochures, are typically used. And so if we can just kind of quickly scan through this, is another church? Each one, look how personal these are. So important these be really personalized materials and not generic. One of the things, though, that I've found is that you need to be in tune. Stop right there, please. You need to be in tune with your congregation. And this is an example of a church that we knew that one of the places that they read was in their newsletter. And so rather than putting a lot of energy into mailers, what we did is just put an insert in each of their newsletters. We're already paying for sending out the newsletters, so it didn't cost us that much to just put an insert. So be a good steward, use the resources you have, and don't inundate people with mail. They'll get upset, and they'll go, why are we spending all this money? And so you can often use the pieces you already have. One of the things we did, this was a debt campaign, and I've done this several places, is that for every dollar you gave, 90 cents of the dollar went towards the debt, 10% was a tithe to missions. And so it put the focus not just on the church. Keep in mind the church is your mission station, so there is mission in your church. So it's not just, well, this is just for us. No, it's not. This is our staging for mission. But it did put an outward focus on it. So what we did is we built a school in Angola, and we also gave part of the tithe to the Alliance Medical Ministry, which was for the working poor and medical care. So it's a great way to have a very specific outward focus. All right? Next, please. Posters up. Now, this was a nicely produced poster, but one of the most effective posters I've seen are the ones that the kids make and put up in the hall. Doesn't cost you much, and people will read it a lot more. And your bulletins. Your bulletins, watch your people. Consistently, what I find is that when people sit down, they scan that bulletin. It's probably one of the best read pieces at your church, if not the most read thing. So what I did with one church is that we didn't even bother to produce a brochure because people weren't reading it. So what we did is we wove in the bulletin every single week for the 4 weeks of the campaign information. So knowing that people would read that, and all they do is, put on the side the brochure if we mailed it in the home. So pay attention to what your congregation is doing. But the bulletins are great source. Websites, people are using websites more and more. A lot of times we'll do a special link to the campaign with the campaign materials on it. The third way is to inspire. You have got to have people move beyond understanding the need to seeing the bigger vision of what you're trying to do. All right, eliminating debt, that's very important. I happen to be a big proponent of not being in debt. But what is the bigger vision? One of the churches I'm working with right now, what we're doing is we're pointing out to people that if we don't pay down this $2.1 million in debt, that over the life of the loan, they'll pay about that same amount in interest over the next 15 years. That's a pretty big vision. What could we do with $2 million in mission and ministry instead of paying it to the bank? And I'm talking about only the interest, not the principal. So the bigger vision is the mission and ministry that can be accomplished as we pay off the debt. And so that's what you want to do. You want to paint people into the vision of where we're going. Okay? So let's look at some of the ways and connect the ministry to giving. I have found this to be so resonant with people. That is a question like this, or this question most often. Lord, what do you want to do through me to fulfill your will for whatever your Methodist church is? Again, the emphasis here, it doesn't say, Lord, what do you want to do through me to build a new family life center? We're not about just building a family life. We're about fulfilling God's will. And each one of us have a personal, non-transferable role in the fulfillment of God's will. So I think this question leads people beyond the need to inspiring them to be God's instrument. We've had special prayer services. Again, prayer is just not emphasized enough in our churches, to pray for our churches. And so we've had special prayer services. We've also had banners and sermons and scripture reflection, and testimonies are always resonant, as Bishop Carter was saying. Drama, especially by children or the youth. And this is something that I always do. It's always the first piece that comes out, and it's a devotion guide. And it's not a devotion guide about why I'm going to give to the campaign. If somebody writes that, well, thank you very much. But it's about how God has been faithful in our lives. And so it's faith sharing. Again, we want this to be as much about faith raising as fundraising. And when you think about it, if God saw you through cancer, I'm kind of thinking that God can see you through a sacrificial gift. And we all have stories of how God has been faithful to us. And so this is where the members of the congregation are encouraged to share how God has been faithful to them. Involvement. This is so important. Involvement increases commitment. If they don't have skin in the game, if they think of that campaign as your campaign and not their campaign, then you're going to have limited results. So you want as many people in your congregation to be involved as possible. So how do we do that? Well, one of the ways is we do a retreat. One of the ways that I do it is I do a retreat. It's a spiritual formation retreat where we come together and we grow together and we pray together and we step forward together. And so that's one of the first ways. One of the first things we do is we come together as spiritual formation and as congregants to move forward. Other ways is to do special events that involve people. This is an example in Cary, North Carolina. What they did is they did Celebrate FUMC. Now, this is a very large church, and they've got like 5 worship services. So all day long, we were doing things, all morning long till about 2 o'clock. And so we'll just quickly go through this. That was the rest of the invitation. Okay, move on. We had booths showing all the different missions and ministries of the church. We had the puppet ministry to do a performance. We had the children sing. We had the youth sing. We even had the United Methodist men sing. Waited till the end, but we did that. And we had the children do plays and things like that. But all day long, if you went to the early service, there was something after for you to see and different groups to be involved. So it was a great way to get a ton of people involved. This is one I did in Texas. And what you want these events to do is to be a reflection of who you are. And so obviously this was in Texas. We had somebody who had a covered wagon, and so we did hamburgers and hot dogs, and it was a great event. But it got everybody in the church together to reflect on what a blessing it is to be a part of the community. One of the best things that I've been doing lately is what Bishop Carter was talking about earlier, and that's Stop Hunger Now. It is an amazing ministry. It was started by a United Methodist pastor in Raleigh, North Carolina. And what you do is in a very short period of time, you package meals. They cost $0.25 each. And they go all over the world. And so most of my campaigns in the last few years have begun by packaging meals for Stop Hunger Now to focus us on why we're doing this capital campaign. We're doing this to do more in mission and ministry for the last and the lost. And so it's a great way to get people involved and so much fun. And so just a couple of pictures after this of the event. How many people have participated in Stop Hunger Now? Oh, y'all are in for a treat. It is wonderful. This is another picture of Stop Hunger Now. Even the little kids can be involved. The oldest members can be involved. It's a great way to get everybody involved. Okay. Every generation is giving less and less to their church. A capital campaign is a great way to teach our children to be involved and to give. And so one of the easy lessons that I've encouraged the churches I've worked with to do is to do different jars. This is a ball jar. We've done Chinese containers, Cool Whip, you name it, Pringles cans. One can says, God's money for me to give. Another can, the next week, is God's money for me to save. And the third can is God's money for me to spend. And what they're encouraged to do, I know it's above and beyond the tithe, but if they get 75 cents, to put $0.25 in each one of those. Now, what is the emphasis in all three of those? God's money, absolutely. Psalm 24:1, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. It's all God's. It's more than just whatever we put in the offering plate. And so it's a great way for our young people to get involved. I was working with a church, and one of these little girls, they were having a contest for a pizza party. Now everybody was going to get one, but they didn't know that. So the first grade, the second grade, and all the different grades were competing to see who could raise the most money. The emphasis wasn't about whatever they might raise. The emphasis was to get them involved and their parents involved. And so one of these little girls who was 4 going on 20 was on her way to preschool. she goes, Dad, I am really worried about the capital campaign. And so you can see the dad, kind of smiling and going, oh, okay, this is going to be good. Goes, what? Tell me more. Said, well, kids, we're competing for a pizza party. And I am just not seeing that level of excitement with the adults. So you just never know, out of the mouths of babes, the difference I can make. And that made him, that's why I know the stories. He came up and said, let me tell you who has just changed my life. It's my little girl. And so, so getting them involved, it's not about the money they raised. It's about the example that they can so often set. And the youth as well. I have, as we speak, there is an Episcopal priest in Birmingham, Alabama. And he will quickly tell you because he was a part of the capital campaign we did in 2001. What he committed to was to get a summer job for the next 3 summers. He was just beginning his sophomore year. And to give the proceeds for his second summer job to the campaign. Now, I don't know how much he gave, but for him to step forward and to make that kind of difference and that kind of sacrifice, reprioritize his life. And now he is a priest. And so he was called to the ministry because of the capital campaign. So it can make a big difference. So we want to involve our youth, not because of whatever they might raise, but because of the difference it will make in their life. Follow-up. And our emphasis is not about bill collecting. Our emphasis in follow-up is creating a congregation of generous givers because of their deep and abiding love for Jesus Christ. This is what we're cultivating. This is what we're nurturing in our follow-up. Lots of different ways to do this. One of the ways is going to do special newsletters or newsletter articles that help to encourage people. You know, so often in both annual stewardship campaigns and capital campaigns, we build it up and we talk about it every week, and then we get our results and nobody hears anything. How'd we do? I don't know. I guess we did okay. I haven't heard anything more. And it just falls off the cliff, literally. And so this was an example of, in Duncan, Oklahoma, a newsletter that they put together, which I thought was so creative because what they did is they talked about FUMC celebrates its 150th anniversary on Duncan's new space station. And it was designed to kind of press them forward as to thinking about the difference that had been made in the capital campaign already. And it talks about, in this article, about how lives were changed and these kids were changed because of the capital campaign and the difference it made in their life and their children's life. And one of the pictures has, whatever his name was, John, new pastor of Duncan United Methodist Church, and there's pictures of a 5-year-old. So it was just a great way, in a fun way. A capital campaign should be fun, to reinforce the good that had been done and the results of the campaign. So newsletters is one way. This is a special newsletter that we did at First United Methodist Church in Prattville, totally focused on what we were doing on the capital campaign after Pledge Sunday. Again, so often, this was like a year later, it was a year later, 2002, is that what we were doing is we were telling people what had been done so that they knew that we were being faithful to what we promised when we were doing the campaign. So often, again, it just dropped off the cliff, and 3 years later we go, well, we only got 70% of our money in. That's because you never invited people to continue to give. And you never told them how their giving was making a difference. So it's no wonder. So special newsletters in addition to newsletter inclusion. How many of you do statements? Raise your hand, please. All right. How many of you do just one statement a year? Anybody? Okay. How many of you do quarterly statements? Okay, good. That's what most Methodist churches. Anybody do a monthly statement? Okay, monthly statements. Well, one, good. Monthly statements are actually the best way because you continue to encourage their giving all year long. Also, the problem with a quarterly statement, especially in that April statement, is that they're already 3 or 4 months behind by the time they get that statement. So even if you do a quarterly statement, I would encourage you to start doing one, say, the 1st of February, So again, you're nurturing and including and encouraging that giving. How many of you include something in your statement other than just what you gave? Good. Good. A couple. Excellent. About 4 or 5. That's excellent. You want to do that. Look at the examples that you receive in the mail. If you've given something to the Cancer Society, I guarantee you when they send that thank you, they're going to send something that connects what you gave to and the difference that's being made. And it's going to thank you. So often we don't even, in our ACS programs or whatever we're using, Shelby or whatever, can do this so easily. It's, even on the statement, we don't even put thank you for your gifts. You know, we shouldn't have to thank people, but the fact of the matter is every other nonprofit's going to be thanking them. So as people decide what to give, who are they going to give to? Are they going to give to the one that's going to thank them? In many cases they will. So we need to thank our people. And again, we need to tie the ministry and the giving. Now this was a couple of inserts with a couple of different churches that I worked with years ago. Both of them have a scripture. And then like the one with the little girl says, many thanks for your generous and faithful support of the ministries of Millbrook United Methodist Church through 2002. Together, okay, I'm older than I used to be. Our ministry, there we go, our ministry proclaimed the gospel, helped change lives, and glorified God. What wonderful blessings lie ahead in 2003. Now, this didn't cost anything to do. We were already sending out the statement. And yet, wouldn't you feel better about your giving if you saw someone from your congregation, you were thanked, and it connected your gift and the giving? That's the kind of thing that encourages people to give. And this goes for both annual campaigns as well as capital campaigns. All right, I think that might be the last one, but is there something else? Yeah. Again, Bishop Carter and I so segued together in any number of ways. And one of the things that he talked about was how often we see giving as scarcity. And people operate out of an attitude of scarcity. But we do have an abundant God. And the one thing I tell every church is that whatever we raise, it's going to be enough. Because God does not ask us to be successful. God asks us to be faithful. And if you have that attitude as its lay leaders or as its pastor, you will be amazed at how much better people will respond than if you operate out of a sense of fear and scarcity. So I just remind us of John 10:10. Jesus said, I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly. So just trust in that and know that it is there. All right, we do have a few minutes, and I know I've quickly gone through this, but I do want to give you the chance to ask questions. What I tried to do is to give you some basic foundational principles, to give you some tips, keys, and ideas. And so now what I'd like to just hear from you is what I didn't tell you that you needed to hear. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the 3-year campaign time, but how long is the actual campaign?
The 3-year campaign, what I mean by that is the period of time that people make their commitments. Now, the actual campaign in front of the congregation, you do a lot of preliminary work, but the actual congregation, usually it's 4 to 5 weeks tops in front of the congregation where people are being invited to give. And the preliminary work before that can be 3 months, 6 months, a year, ideally about 6 months. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Yes, sir. A list of consultants? Go to your trustee GBOD website and you will see a list of consultants. They're not, that list, because it's on that website, it does not mean that they are endorsed by the GBOD, but they are ones that consistently work in that. I will tell you that I'm on that list, but I reincorporated when I moved to Florida, and so now I'm Compass Consultant. So you'll see my name, Kat Luna, but my old company did its name, so I'm on there, so you don't need a list. Yes?
You mentioned about do not combine the
Absolutely.
annual with the capital campaign.
Yes.
What if you're like 9 years into a 20-year mortgage? Is there any point at which it does make sense to combine them?
Never.
Okay.
Absolutely. In fact, the harder it is, because you're 9 years in a 20-year mortgage, the more important it is to do it right. So, yes.
We are going to be trying to retire a $3.5 million debt, but we're also trying to build our endowment, and the base that's going to help us do that is really aging rapidly in our congregation. Is there ever a time when you combine both? You really don't need to do a campaign for the endowment, but is there a way to combine making them more aware of the endowment while helping them retire the debt because they don't like debt? That's that generation that hates debt.
You are absolutely on target on that. You don't want to, it's basic Dave Ramsey type of stuff. You don't want to emphasize your endowment when you've got so much in debt, especially with investments not getting what they used to. So take care of that debt. But every single time I do a campaign on the estimated giving card, I'll say, I plan to include my church in my will. Now, it doesn't affect our bottom line, but what it does do is suggest to them one time to do that. And then typically what I'll do and encourage churches to do is in that follow-up period of 3 years is to do something on planned giving during that time as part of that holistic approach as we work through that. So great point, great question. Others? Yes, sir.
Consultant fees, are they based off the size of the church or flat across the board? Or?
My fees are comparable to RSI and Generis, which are the two largest consulting companies out there. And what all three of us base our fees on is average worship and membership of your church, basically, and especially the budget of your church. And originally, when I first started with this, I wasn't trained by everybody like a lot of the others were. I was doing a fixed fee for everybody, and I did find that the larger the church, the more work I had to do. And so it's a fair way of pricing it. But again, do not let anybody charge you a % of what's raised. And if you go to nonprofit codes, there's a website for that. You'll see that is against the codes, and you can see why. Yes, sir.
I've been with this church about 4 years, and we have yet to have an annual campaign take place. So could you provide me with how we would get one started? Is it any different than what you presented here to go forward?
It's somewhat similar. There's some materials that I gave last time in the previous presentation that you might pick up, and the book I would recommend, and it's just basically a how-to manual, is Herb Miller's Consecration Sunday as a foundational. But don't do a capital campaign until you do that base fund day campaign. Okay? Anyone else?
Can you quickly review what you meant when you said conduct your campaign when the people are there?
Yes, one of the first things I do when I'm actually signed on, the attendance was asked, is look at the 3-year attendance trends. And for example, in my area of the country, which is similar to yours because I'm on the panhandle of Florida, we don't have a lot of people there during the summer. So we wouldn't do a campaign in the summer because we wouldn't have most of the people we expect to give, or at least as many of them. So we'll typically do it back to school, which is a high attendance time, or Lent are the 2 times, or right after Lent before school gets out. So yes.
Okay, I want to follow up. The time where we have the most people is when the snowbirds are down, and they usually go to 2 churches. So the giving is divided between their northern church and their southern church. How do you deal with that?
Right. Snowbirds are typically not a large source of revenue annually or capital-wise, at least not in my area. So that's the kind of thing that, as the leaders of the church, you need to assess is, because I know before we built our large family life center, our attendance of our core members actually went down because we had so many snowbirds there that they were like, I'm not even going to have a seat, so I won't come. So what we did is we did our campaign at a time when our membership base, our giving base was there. So it's not just, and that's the kind of thing that a consultant can help you sort through. Again, you want your giving base. It's not just raw numbers. It's not because you do Boy Scout Sunday and Youth Sunday and whatever, and you've got people coming from all over the community. It's when is the times when your real membership, whether they be constituent or real, took the vows, are in attendance? That's when you want to do the campaign. Yes, sir?
Some of us are in congregations with very senior members, over 90% seniors, very resistant to commitment, march,
and deal with that almost every time. A lot of it is, and yet they are the people who have built our churches. And what I find with that constituent base is that if you will just help them to be open to the Spirit, that they will respond. You just have to be patient with them. They are resistant to change. One of the stories that I would tell is in Enid, Oklahoma, the older adult class, this was in 2005 or so, the older adult class was totally against what I thought was, how could you be against this? They had a roof that literally leaked. They put buckets under it to catch the water. The stone that they had was just black from mold. The carpet was torn. It clearly needed renovations. And so how could you not be for that? And so we began that campaign with that group very against us going forward. And yet we felt and discerned that indeed it was God's will. Now, by the time we got through with the campaign, every single person in that class gave, and the class gave. So it can be done, but it may not be. That group of people may not respond. And again, all we can do is be faithful. But if you help them to understand the need and see the vision of what we're doing, they are a committed group of people who, if you can just open up their hearts, will give and give generously.
My question is, can we hire a non-Christian as a consultant?
I'm sorry, say again?
Can we hire a non-Christian, somebody who is not a Christian, as a consultant?
Personally, I don't believe you can, and be faithful to it. I also have a real problem. Now, I'm a United Methodist, always have been, always will be. I'm a cradle Methodist, so I love our church. But personally, I have a hard time understanding why Methodist churches would have people lead their campaign and not be Methodist. Because there's a reason that there's different denominations. And so for this campaign not to be something, okay, now we're going to stop everything and all of a sudden we're going to have a different emphasis is to me not being faithful. And so I don't see how a non-Christian consultant could encourage people to pray and to give as Christ gave and talk about sacrifice in a meaningful way. So to me, I think it needs to not only be a Christian, but of the same faith so that they're speaking the same language of grace and understand who John Wesley is and appreciate it because they are Methodist. So personally, I think it should be not only a Christian, which I cannot imagine not doing that, but ideally a United Methodist as well. I had somebody call me in a town, and I'll try to make it as hard to pin down, in a large city, and they called me and they said, we'd like you to come interview. And I said, okay, well, sure, I'd be happy to. And I went on their website, and it said, women should be seen and not heard, and all this kind of stuff. And so I was like, interesting. And so I called them, and because sometimes you get websites crossed, and I called them and I said, hey, listen, is this your website? Oh yeah, it is. And okay, great. I know I've got a little bit kind of a deep voice. You do know I'm a woman, don't you? They go, oh yeah, we know that. And I said, well, how are you justifying and reconciling what you have on your website, and you want me to come interview to be your consultant? And their response was, well, yeah, but you're good. And I was like, well, thank you very much. but we're not going to be a good fit. And so I think that answers your question, is a non-Christian is not going to be a good fit. And that's so important. Fit. Now, you know, fit is the key. If you are interviewing a consultant and you do not sense that this person will resonate with your congregation, I don't care if they're, you know, the #1 consulting firm and every single time they get 100 times your annual giving, if that person is not a good fit for your congregation, you need to move on. It's not the company you're hiring, it's the person. And as you hire consultants, make sure that you're actually interviewing the person who will be doing your work and not, you know, a hired gun that's coming in to try to get you to buy them. So, so that would be one tip as you look for consultants. Yes, ma'am.
You said to keep the emphasis on the mission and away from the money.
Mm-hmm.
We have an elderly congregation as well, and they focus on the money. How do we get them away from, we need a full-time pastor. We're part-time pastoral ministry, and we're trying to get a full-time pastor. We've been working on it for several years, and we have an account that we put money in. But we still hear people say, we're never going to get there, we're never going to get there. And that's the head of finance. They focus on the money aspect only.
Well, and if you focus on the money, that's what you're going to focus on.
But how,
So-
do you have any suggestions on how to switch them over to the mission that's needed?
First of all, don't make the money the focus of your communication. Instead, focus on the difference that's being made and just continue to point them forward. You know, we cannot respond to our congregations or portions of our congregations because they will take you to a place that you don't need to be. You have got to be courageous, and you've got to say, you know what? We are not going to focus on whatever our deficit is or the money. You know, what we're going to focus on is, where is God calling us? Do you not believe that God is going to take us to where we want to go? Well, then how about we trust God and not our pocketbooks? Because that's the bigger picture of what we're trying to get you to do. So it's hard, it's an uphill battle, but if we don't do it, it'll never get done. So we are on the time when I need to stop.